Welcome back to Driving and Dragons. It's Daniel. And today we're going to talk about how you're doing it wrong arguing online about TTRPGs. This will not be a fun one. 280ZX, we're finishing up some of that detail work on that valve cover. It's pretty awesome. I've started doing some other checks on the engine issues that I'm having, and it kind of looks like I probably got some distributor problems that I'm going to need to make adjustments to. Hopefully I don't have to replace the whole thing, but if I do, it's not the end of the world. And as problems go, it's pretty low on the totem pole and an easy fix. So that car ought to be running here real soon. On the plus side, I found a pair of good quality, ready to attach fenders to replace my two front fenders and get some of the body work out of the way up in Duluth, Georgia. So that's going to take a little bit of a road trip. Maybe I'll record some of it. But finding good unrusted fenders at a good price is awesome for this car because they're really bad about getting rust, and just another step closer to a finished project. So let's talk about this. Why am I talking about arguing online? Well, the real crux of it comes from there was a back and forth between the basic expert and another person on X arguing about, the dungeon as a mythical underworld, and it spawned off into some of the other stuff, such as, the mythology being taken out of the game and Dungeons and Dragons being based on mythology, and other people arguing about what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and dungeon ecology, what do they have to eat? How does it make sense? Where does the monster take a piss? Where does the monster sleep? Why is the monster there? Why is this set up that way? And it all boils back down to some of the more annoying things about these quote-unquote debates that come up in tabletop role-playing game social media, so to speak. All of us get involved in them. We all take part in them. We all have discussions about these games that we like to play and that we love. And unfortunately, there's a lot of missing each other that happens, and a lot of just taking things off the rails and unproductive back and forth that happens. And this goes beyond the normal tribalism. But tribalism does have kind of a key part of it. And at the end, it kind of comes down to the you don't play make-believe the way I think you should play debate, which is not really a debate. At the end of the day, the correct way to play a tabletop role-playing game is the whatever way facilitates the goals of your group and your table. I get that the basic expert tries to take this really obtuse view when it comes to old school role-playing and that sort of thing, and gaming in general. It's funny because he'll sit there and talk about dunking on people who have 40 years experience. And he's not really dunking on anybody, he's just being obtuse. He comes in with these really narrow focused definitions that nobody else agrees to, and then says he's correct because his argument's what fits the narrow focused definition. Such as, it's fine to do whatever you want to do at your table, but if you're changing rules, you're not really playing Dungeons & Dragons anymore, because Dungeons & Dragons is defined as a game with these rules. And it's based on this, and because it was based on this in the beginning, that's what it's always based on. And this is just a obtuse and pedantic argument that is not, it isn't the dunk he thinks it is. But it does point out one key thing that needs to happen anytime you're going to have a back and forth with somebody in one of these discussions, if you want it to be something that is pleasant and productive and goes somewhere you want it to. The first thing is defining terms. You have to define terms that everybody agrees on so we know what we're arguing about. Otherwise, these arguments always end up boiling down to well, that's not what I mean when I say XYZ. XYZ is defined as this. You have to have a common definition. And I'm going to use an example. It's a political example, but, get over it. I, as a devout Catholic, I am militantly and unexclusively anti-abortion in every way. The only exceptions are the immediate health of the mother. And when I say the immediate health, I mean something like, you got an ectopic pregnancy that's going to kill somebody, and the child is functionally already dead in the first place. Yes. You can have an exception for an already deceased fetus. At that point in time, the child is not alive anymore. It's just a dead body that is inside the woman. And that's it. That's the only exception. There's no other exception. But you'll get into these arguments with somebody about pro-life, pro-choice. They're back and forth. And one of the ones that the pro pro-choice side likes to say is, well, what about rape and incest? What about rape, incest, life of the mother? And then the mistake that the people on the pro-life side tends to is they start getting into the arguments about over the percentages and the, how many this happens and how that's not really a major issue. You're arguing a marginal case, etc., etc. That's not the appropriate tack to take, and the reason it's not is not because those aren't good arguments. The reason it's not the correct tack to take is because it has nothing to do with what the other side is actually saying. The pro-choice side does not care about rape, incest, life of the mother. The pro-choice side cares about they want abortion for whatever term they want, for whatever reason they want. So the correct response is, okay, I'm going to go ahead and give you those exceptions. All the way, no matter what the situation is, rape, incest, life of the mother, abortion's legal, but I get to ban every other abortion, period, from the point of conception. Are we okay with that? Pro-choice person, well, no, there's all kinds of other reasons you might need to have an abortion. It's like, okay, well, don't bring up those three exceptions ever again, because those three exceptions have nothing to do with your argument. You're just taking this extreme narrow edge case and you're throwing it out there as the argument in order to kind of get dunk on points. We see this kind of argument in RPGs all the time, and it even boils down kind of to the one that I'm thinking about the most is one that the OGGM brought up regarding this dungeon ecology debate. What was that? It's all game of make-believe. It doesn't matter. It's all make-believe. You can make up whatever you want to. That is a stupid argument, and it needs to go away. It needs to completely disappear from this entire situation. Why does it need to completely disappear from this entire situation? We all understand that's what it is. The discussion has nothing to do about whether or not this is make-believe and whether or not somebody actually can do something and whether or not it matters in the big scheme of things. It's not about, does this affect your life? It's not about, does this matter in the big scheme of things, how people play make-believe? That is a stupid, facile argument that has no bearing on this. We are having a discussion about something in the game, and we are debating finer points of the hobby. And you know what? Within that context, it absolutely does matter, because there's points on both sides. We just have to define the point we're arguing. And then it turns into, hey dude, the it's all make-believe, it doesn't matter argument is not an argument, because it clearly matters when what you're trying to do is determine how realistic a dungeon should be, for example. Moving off of that, we have these bad faith argument tactics that happen, and we've all seen them, and you can usually tell pretty quickly when somebody is just arguing in bad faith. They're always going to hammer in whatever point it is. Maybe they're just dug in and militantly religious. Like, I don't think the basic expert necessarily argues in bad faith on purpose. I think that he's dug into a concept, but he wants to use definitions for the discussion that nobody else agrees to. And you have to go back in and say, well, what are we defining as playing these games or playing old school, or what are we defining as playing Dungeons and Dragons? If we're defining playing Dungeons and Dragons as a tabletop role-playing game by which narrative elements are controlled by mechanical precepts that were originally developed by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and produced by TSR and moved through into Wizards of the Coast after a purchase in multiple different editions, then all of his arguments are completely false. If you are saying we are going explicitly based on the printed and published rules of this specific edition of Dungeons and Dragons, then his argument holds more merit. But it still kind of falls apart when he starts talking about the stuff about dungeon ecology, and when he starts talking about the mythology and the mythical underworld idea that he put forth. That can be at your table. It can be a mythical underworld. Nobody can say otherwise. But dungeon has kind of a specific meaning. And while you can say that most of Gary Gygax's dungeons fit in a certain way or followed a certain pattern, most of his monsters and stuff followed a certain pattern, that may be true, but that doesn't make it the only thing that's correct, nor even the most common definition. The most common definition of a dungeon in the sense of Dungeons and Dragons is an area in which the players must resolve a conflict and achieve a goal. That's all a dungeon is. It is a defined area in which an adventure takes place. A dungeon can be a church, a dungeon can be a lost catacomb, a dungeon can be a portal to the underworld, a dungeon can be an actual dungeon, it can be a castle, it can be anything. And the level of realism that needs to be there is going to be determined by the style of gameplay that is happening at the table. Expert's biggest mistake in all of these is that he always runs from that one rule that has existed in every single rule book. I don't know if it's in his specific rule books, I doubt it is, but every single tabletop role-playing game, and certainly every single edition of Dungeons & Dragons, has a version of Rule 0 codified in the rules that explicitly states that the Dungeon Master changes whatever they want, however they want, in order to fit the theme of their game and to ensure the enjoyment of their players. If I am running a narrative-based game, things must make sense within the narrative of that world. If I develop a setting, even if, let's just say I'm doing a pure adventure style game like a hex crawl, I'm doing the no prep thing, which is just a complete fallacy. Maybe I'll talk about no prep later. But I'm just doing the situation. It's all going to be random tables. It's going to be a hex crawl. I'm still creating a setting, and within that setting are certain rules and certain expectations by which the world itself needs to function. This can be even as simple as basic physics. If I don't say otherwise, we're following the basic physics of Earth, which means that gravity means that two bodies with mass pull each other towards the center of mass. It means that objects that are in motion tend to stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. It means that energy is neither created or destroyed, only conserved and converted. It means that the rules function with a certain level of reality and a certain level of expectations from the player base. And these are things that we all, in many cases, wordlessly agree upon. It does not mean that those things cannot be changed. It does not mean that they can't be treated otherwise. At the end of the day, every dungeon he runs can be a mythical portal to the underworld, but it doesn't make it wrong when somebody else says no, dungeons need to have a specific ecology and they need to follow certain rules and they need to have certain guidelines. The problem comes across, you have one side saying, no, they absolutely must, these things need to make sense, blah, blah, blah. You got his side saying, absolutely not, it's this and this is the way it was from the very beginning and this is how the things were set up. Both of these arguments are both correct and incorrect, mainly because neither party is agreeing on what they are actually debating and arguing over. So they are in essence doing it wrong when it comes to these online debates and discussions. This is the kind of crap that happens on Reddit. This is why I will never be on Reddit. This is why I have no interest in going down Reddit rabbit holes. Because they just become places where everybody pettifogs and just blurs the argument and attempts to manipulate the point and change the target, and nothing productive can happen. What you have to do is you have to set out and say, dungeon ecology, when is it important? Or what level of it is important? Or what style of game does there need to be? Now you could say, what did Gary Gygax use in his games for dungeon ecology? What did he think needed to happen and what philosophy did he follow? And you can argue the merits of that style versus another style. However, you cannot accurately say that dungeon ecology has no merit, that it's pointless, that setting up a dungeon that is more realistic and operates more properly with more realistic tendencies is wrong, because for some games it's absolutely 100% what's necessary. The opposite is also true. You can't sit there and say that a random dungeon that just happens to have monsters that pop up all over the place that don't need to be there for any reason in any way hurts the game. You can even run narrative games on that, depending on what your players and your group feels is acceptable when it comes to things like suspension of disbelief in order for them to enjoy the game and what they're looking for. They may want to play Diablo on tabletop, where they run into a room and there's monsters there for no damn reason and you just beat them up and kill them and take their treasure. And the monsters are there because there's hell at the bottom of this place, or a bad guy came in and brought it there or left them there. Who cares? The fun is there's monsters, I kill monsters, I get treasure. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's also nothing wrong with saying, hey, look, I have a strong narrative world with a story, with guidelines. This is supposed to be a specific location, and it needs to make sense to be that location in order for my players to experience an immersive experience. So when it comes to doing it wrong, the first thing that you gotta stay away from is these bullshit arguments. And when I say the bullshit arguments, I mean the ones where it's like, whatever's fun for your table is the right way to play. That's granted as a global concept. It is not granted as we're discussing whether or not the crunchier mechanics of 3.5 or the looser mechanics of 5th edition are better. It doesn't have any bearing on THACO versus to hit rolls. Those things are discussions about which mechanic do we feel better accomplishes the task of determining when somebody gets hit and how much damage or when damage is dealt or what a critical hit is. Those are being argued on their merits, and whatever's best for your table is not an argument that needs to pop up there. And it's all make-believe and it doesn't matter needs to die a slow and painful death far away from any argument regarding the hobby. That is not the win you think it is. As a matter of fact, bringing it up is basically either an admission of defeat, or it's an admission that you're too immature to walk away from something that you have no interest in without messing with everybody else. You guys are having a discussion that I don't think matters. Rather than be an adult and go having a discussion with somebody else or wait till the topic changes or introduce something else, I'm just going to shit all over whatever you guys are talking about so that I can be part of the group, have attention now. That's generally how that happens. Debate, even forceful debate, can be a good thing, can be a healthy thing. But you have to agree on what the point is, what the point of the discussion is, where your actual goal in having the argument lies, and you've got to stay away from these nonsense discussions that are non-arguments within the context of what you're discussing. That's what I got to say on this, and we'll be moving on to some more fun stuff that actually has to do with playing your game and not arguing about it in the next one. I'll see you guys next time. Like, share, subscribe, tell everybody about it.